Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, January 22nd, 2009. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. With this week, a vertical tasting of Firestone Walker 10, 11, and 12, and an interview with Matt Brynildson and Jamie Smith of the brewery. We'll talk about blending, barrel aging, bottle aging, and several other techniques that we can put to work at home. Well, if you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And you can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. Orders for our 2009 Brewers Logbooks still coming in. The logbooks have a calendar in the front to track your brews and a space to log the details of 50 brewing sessions in the back. You can check them out in our online store at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us. Click on our associate link first. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you the show. And we appreciate your support. I want to start off with a clarification. There are some times that I feel happy to be proven wrong, and this is one of them. Last week, I read a letter from Greg from Hawaii who talked about making ice beer by freezing a jug of homebrew and then turning it upside down over a mug until the good stuff melts out and leaves water ice behind. You get a stronger kind of, more of a liquory kind of drink. I told Greg that sounded fun, but was probably illegal, as I had heard many times before that making ice beer in that fashion is a form of distilling. Well, Matt from Londonderry, Vermont, contacted me on Twitter and said that making ice beer is a form of concentration, not distillation, and it isn't illegal. Well, you know, I can't stand not knowing something for sure, so I wanted to clear this up. So I called the ATF initially and was told that since 9/11, that wasn't their job anymore. So I was referred to the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, or the TTB. And there I contacted Art Resnick, who is Director of Public and Media Affairs for the TTB, and I described what Greg was doing. And Art said this. Art said, under TTP regulations, the method used to make ice beer is not considered distillation. Any concerns TTB has about a brewer's method to make ice beer and the amount of ice that is removed is in regard to proper tax classification, which is not applicable to home brewers brewing beer for personal or family use, as defined by 26 U.S.C. 5053E. So there you go. In the eyes of the feds, according to Art Resnick, making ice beer is legal at home. So thanks very much to Art Resnick for the help and to Matt for challenging my assertion on Twitter. So ice away. Let me know how that goes. Brian from Cleveland Heights, Ohio, wrote with another legally motivated note. Brian says, at one point in your show, you encouraged everyone to fill their 2009 Brewers Logbook, which contains space for 50 batches. If a usual batch is 5 gallons, are you not encouraging people to break the law on the 200-gallon limit for homebrewing in the States? Not a big deal to me because I think it's a silly law, but just wanted to raise that point with you. Well, thanks, Brian. But you know, I've used my logbook to brew batches of less than a gallon. So it's not necessarily an invitation to break the law. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Dirk from Smithfield, Utah, emailed to follow up on the status of that state's home brewing legislation. I think we talked about this, but it's worth a re-mention for those brewers in Utah. Dirk says, Representative Christine Johnson has sponsored House Bill 51, Exemption for Alcoholic Beverage Manufacturing License. On November 19, 2008, it passed the Business and Labor Committee with a favorable vote. This year, the bill has been introduced early so that when the legislature convenes on January 26th, the home brewing bill will be well on its way. And Dirk says Utah brewers should contact their state representatives to express their support for this bill, and I agree. We need to get that moving forward. Scott Coué, who taught us how to roast coffee at home in an earlier episode, wrote in after hearing Chris Colby and me talking about Firm Cap S, which is used to prevent blow-off, Scott says, if indeed Gas-X uses the same ingredient as Firm Cap S, then we're talking about simethicone. It breaks down surface tension, and so bubbles don't form, and ones that exist pop. A drop or two in a sink full of soap suds will clear it pretty fast. Scott says it's fun to watch. Gas-X and such all have flavorings in the product, so probably not a good choice. But I wonder if simethicone is the key, since I would think that it would kill the head retention. Well, good question, Scott, and good point about the flavoring of Gas-X tablets, although I'm not sure how much impact one tablet of Gas-X would have on a full 5 gallons of beer. But if you try Gas-X to reduce the potential for blow-off, let me know what you find out. Regarding keg fermentation, Dave from Pittsburgh writes, I bored a 3/4-inch hole in the keg lid. This is fitted with either a blow-off tube or an airlock using a drilled stopper as needed. In addition, a drilled stopper fitted with a long piece of stainless or rigid tubing can be used when racking with CO2. Slide the tube into the keg to the depth needed to rack off clear beer. Push with low pressure. Dave says, with this method, the outline is not needed, but be sure to switch the lids after the final racking for normal use. Well, I got another email from Jeff Anderson, who has an invention that he's been working on that may make that kind of thing redundant. He says, I make and sell a small food-grade silicone rubber device that slides over the nipple on the keg, and then you can put an airlock right on top of the keg. You can check them out at kegpasties.com. That's keg, Pasties.com for those little rubber thingies that you put on your keg. One more. This one is from Mike in Columbus, Ohio. In regards to the recent discussions about the use of propane in the garage, I had to laugh this past Friday when I spent the day home with the kids due to the deep freeze and school cancellations, and I brewed a beer in the warmth of the basement using my heat sticks. Well, there you go. No worries about propane or propane accessories when you're using heat sticks. Now, this was a fun show to record, as you can imagine. Mark Smith recently got married out in California and returned with excellent beers. And it helps that his brother works at Firestone Walker Brewing in Paso Robles, California, by the way. So when Mark offered to donate a bottle each of Firestone Walker 10, 11, and 12 for vertical tasting with Matt Brynildson, the brewer, I thought that was a pretty good idea. So Andy Sparks joined Mark and me in the studio as we talked via Skype to Jamie Smith and Matt in California. Jamie Smith and Matt Brynildson, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And in the studio, opening beers, is Andy Sparks.
Hey, I'm glad to be here, really glad to be here.
And the reason we're all getting together, Mark Smith, Jamie's brother, and Mark has brought these beers. And in the background, in silence, is your new wife, Kat.
Yes.
And congratulations, first of all.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah, it was a ball. We had a ball out there in California getting married, so we really had a good time, and always glad to be back. So got to be back on Basic Brewing.
Well, we're practically giggling in anticipation of these beers. Jamie, I guess let's get started, and we've got in front of us Firestone 10, 11, and 12. Tell us about these beers. Give us some background from the marketing side of things.
Well, actually, I think that, Matt and I both had talked about those a little bit. Matt wanted to do a really kind of a strong ale, and it kind of morphed into this whole making of several strong ales and blending the beers together. It kind of came together not as a planned out venture as much as just kind of making some different beers, putting them together, and then blending them, which was kind of an idea he had put together. But basically, they were just a project where we wanted to try to do something. I think, where for years Firestone had made very drinkable beers, but kind of more of a session type of beer. And it really was an effort to I don't want to say prove to everybody, but really show our versatility and our ability to go out, step outside the box and do something different and create some really flavorful, strong beers. and then kind of have a really interesting story in the fact that they're blended with the help of winemakers, and kind of bringing and enhancing that whole vintage piece with these beers. So that was the impetus for them.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, this is Matt here. Part of it is we went 10 years without getting a chance to make a barley wine or a big beer, so I think we got really excited and we put forth a lot of energy towards all of this, and probably went a little overboard, and as a result needed to kind of blend our way back to something we could sell.
You don't want to smack people in the face too hard. Right?
That's right.
Well,
the whole project started out, it was like, well, here you go, guys, it's the 10th anniversary, make something special. And, we started out saying, well, yeah, we could make a barley wine. Yeah, let's brew that. And then later we're like, well, everybody makes a barley wine. Let's make an imperial stout. And then we made that, and we're like, well, everybody does that too, and we got to do something original. And we made an IPA or a double IPA, and then finally we were like, well, man, we have all these different beers. We need to start figuring out how we can put these all together into something that's greater maybe than the sum of its parts. And none of us really had any experience blending per se, although blending has always been a part of Firestone, not in this type, not barrel blending. And of course here we are right smack dab in the middle of wine country, so it seemed natural to tap the winemakers in our area. The family obviously has their roots deeply in winemaking, and it all just kind of came together. It's hard to say when exactly we woke up and said, "Whoa, this is what we got to do," but it came together and it really worked. And
yeah, that's one thing with our company is we certainly, for the most part, in those projects, didn't really set out to go, okay, we've identified a target market, and it wasn't taken from a marketing approach by any means. It was really something that came from the brewers and from Matt. So that's definitely a genuine project, and it wasn't trying to as much go out and, okay, we've got that demographic, handled. Now let's go to this one. It was really it was thought of as a brewing side of the thing. So,
and I'm from Minnesota, so I'm not from a wine background whatsoever. So to have been transplanted out here to California and then be exposed to all this winemaking, which is just a whole nother area of fermentation science that was very foreign to me when I first got here. And I was really taken by this whole barrel aging, then blending to flavor. And you talk to most winemakers, and they wouldn't even dream of putting out, just kind of single production wines. It's typically about minimally blending multiple barrels together, and most of wine history is blending different varieties of grapes together and trying to marry flavors together to make something that's really, really appealing.
And this is a fairly rare beer right now, and it got snapped up pretty quickly when you first put it out, right?
Yeah, I guess so. We only make about 500 cases. I think this year we did a little more than that.
Yeah, just a little more. Yeah.
When we sit down with the winemakers to do the blend, one of the very first things I say is that there really isn't a target volume to make. Here's what we have to work with. Let's make the absolute best beer we can. And, currently in the cellar, there's probably 100 barrels in the program, I would say. We chose, I believe, 32 barrels this year is all we were able to drag out. So, hopefully as we move forward and the program becomes more and more developed, we may be able in certain years to release more if the winemakers give it their blessing. But it's really an organic process.
Absolutely.
Now we've opened the beer, we've poured it, and we're enjoying it right now. And it's
we're gonna have to catch up with you here.
Yeah, yeah, it's delicious. I guess we can talk a little bit about what we're experiencing right now. But I get oak on the nose.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, did you open 10? Which one did you open?
10. Yeah, we're starting from the oldest to the youngest. But we're getting oak on the nose.
I smell a lot of chocolate.
Yeah.
Like milk chocolate and vanilla.
And then in the flavor, the oak is not tannic. To me, it's kind of a soft, kind of woody, oaky flavor that comes in kind of at the end. I'm wondering how this. I've had this beer before, but it's been so long, and I didn't have it enough to kind of make an imprint on my brain of what this beer is or was. one of the things I want to talk to you about is how beers like these age in the bottle over time. I get questions all the time from homebrewers, what beers should I age and how should I age them? And it's a common question. So this beer has held up wonderfully, but I just wonder how it's aged over time.
Well, I think you talk to 10 brewers, you're going to get 10 different opinions on beers and aging and what's good and what's bad. I think generally speaking, what I believe and what the program has kind of proven to us is that beers with a lot of heavy aromatics from hops, a lot of hop oil associated in the finished product, tend not to age well by our palates. We're not really fond of oxidized hop notes. Now, there are people out there that age double IPAs and like them. I think if you're paying attention, though, Russian River recently released their hoppy beers in bottles, and I think it says at least 10 times on the label, do not age this beer, drink this beer fresh. Hops are for drinking, not for aging. And it's, general logic in production breweries that actually really hoppy beers with a lot of aromatics don't particularly age well when it comes to the aroma. Of course, historically, hops were added in excess to IPAs to help them, microbiologically speaking. Now, 10 had more hoppy beer in it than any of our other blends. It had 2 full barrels of Ruby, which was kind of a one-off beer we did with Jim Seebeck, who was the head brewer at Three Floyds at the time. So I get a certain amount of oxidized hop note, but it's such a small portion of the beer, I think it just happens to, in this case, lend some interesting complexity. But, in general, beers of higher alcohol will age better. Oak seems to have an effect on beer to kind of mellow things out. Maybe there's tannins in oak that help aging and help protect the beer. But, in general, it seems the bigger the beer, the better it ages.
And what's the ABV of this one?
What is it?
Do you remember?
12%.
12%?
Yeah, 12%.
Wow.
Yeah, 12%.
12%.
Yeah. You can tell a little of the alcohol warmth as you drink it. You
Yeah.
pick that up, and it has a little of that kind of bourbon-y kind of character. I don't know how much of it's the wood that I associate with it, but...
another little thing about these beers, when I was homebrewing, I actually was very fond of malty, big middle body beers, and I mashed at high temperatures, and I really was looking for a lot of pronounced maltiness in my finished beers. The longer I've brewed and the more I've been in production brewing, I've leaned towards thinning beers out a little bit more, and I say that just by talking about the middle malt body. We tend to mash at lower temperatures, and in the case of these beers, we purposefully made beers that when they came out of stainless steel, when they were young, they were really hot. I mean, they really weren't very pleasant beers to drink, and they were really beers and recipes that were built to be put in barrels and to age, and the hope was that we weren't going to end up with a lot of cloying, sweet, kind of sticky beer, sticky wine being the parallel, that we were going to have really lean beers that would age well and pick up a lot of barrel quality and carry that forward. And so that was really the aim of the project. That's changed a little bit. When we get on to the next couple of beers, we added some sweet beers into the mix, but 10 across the board, all the beers that went into 10 were pretty darn lean up front. Yeah,
that's a good point. This is a big beer, but it's not sticky. It does clean. It does finish fairly clean. And I have heard from mead makers that if you've got a mead that tastes hot in alcohol, if you age it over a long period of time, that hotness in the alcohol will kind of calm down and become smoother. Are you experiencing the same thing with these big kind of hot beers as well?
Yeah, and most of this, we're only 3 years into this project, so I consider us novices still at this, but I took a note from, say, the distilled spirits world. I mean, that obviously is happening there. Here you have, basically white lightning. You've got this really, almost pure alcohol solution that you put into the barrel, and you're asking the barrel to try to mellow this thing out and turn it into something that has some drinkability and some complementary flavors. I think winemakers probably experience the same thing. I'm not well versed in winemaking at all, but and alcohol, even though you don't necessarily always perceive it as just ethanol, is a major player in the flavor of beers, and obviously it's a solvent in of itself, so it's going to carry with it a lot of flavor, active compounds. It has a lot to do with the aroma of a strong beer like this, so it's a major factor when formulating these products.
Now, we spent a lot of time in, I think it was, August of 2007, talking about the formulation of 10 and the blending of 10 and that whole process. So, listeners, if you want to find out the whole story behind 10, go back and listen to that episode in the archives. But moving from 10 to 11, what changed in the process between those two beers?
Well, I think the main thing was we had more to work with, and we had beers that had been in barrel at that point for a full year plus. So we had some more mature beers to draw from. We certainly had gained some experience from the first go-around. Certainly the way we approached the blending session was completely different. The first time around, we kind of went a little crazy. We set up all the tables in our tasting room, and I think we had probably a dozen winemakers plus a portion of the brewing staff sitting at these tables. So we probably had 15 or more people in the room, and try to get 15 different people's opinions and somehow make a beer out of it. It was barely organized chaos. So it was really, really tricky. So the second time around, we kind of went, the complete opposite direction. We had only a handful. I think maybe we talked to 3 different winemakers the second go-around. Rather than try to somehow fold 10 separate components into a single beer, we said, hey, if we only need to work with 4 or 5 components, that's fine. If we only want to work with 3, that's fine. And we kind of narrowed it down for the blending session. The beers that really stood out that second time around, Parabola, after being in the barrel for a year, was just outstanding. Bravo, which is our Imperial Brown Ale, turned out to be just an excellent beer after it sat in the barrel longer. So that same thing where these really hot, kind of maybe somewhat unbalanced beers really came around. And so actually the blending of 11 was pretty simple. I mean, everybody loved the beers, and putting it together was really kind of a pleasure.
I don't know if I'm detecting a tiny bit more of a kind of a floral note in the 11.
11, yeah.
And maybe that's because it's a year fresher. I don't know.
Yeah, you can a little bit more of a hop citrus thing on the nose there.
Which is interesting because it has less of the hop-driven beers in it. So I'd have to say that aromatic quality probably isn't hop-derived.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that happens in our brewery anyway, and I'm only speaking from our experience, is that these beers, for the most part, were brewed with blends of the 2 house ale strains. We have the British ale strain that we use for all the Firestone beers, and we have what is essentially a kind of a morphed version of Chico yeast or American ale yeast that we use for the Nectar ale beers. And typically when we make a big beer, we sick both of our dogs on it, hoping that we can, one will take care of what the other might not be able to. And the combination of those two yeasts in a really strong wort, fermenting at normal temperatures, when I say normal, 68 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, we get a lot of ester production, a lot more ester production than we get in our normal strength beers. In fact, when these beers are young, I get big, almost banana, it almost smells like Hefeweizen sometimes. It's so banana-like and pear drop-like.
Yeah, I can pick that up. Maybe it's the power of suggestion, but I can pick up a little bit of banana in there.
Yeah, and so I think maybe some of those higher notes that are coming off of this may be more a result of that fermentation than hop itself. None of the beers in this blend had late hopping or dry hopping, really. So Now, interestingly enough, one of the components in this second beer, in 11, Rufus, was brewed using the dark candy sugar, the dark Belgian candy sugar, the liquid dark candy sugar.
Yeah.
And that has such a unique flavor, and it's nothing that finds its way into our normal products, but I found that to be a really fun adjunct to use in this program. It seems to marry really well with oak.
And what kinds of percentage of the sugar are you using in the beers?
Oh, shoot. I was hoping you were going to ask me that. It's really low. I mean, we're talking single-digit % of the weight of, compared to the grist bill.
So it's not as big as a Belgian quad or triple.
No, when we get to tasting 12, we'll taste a beer that was blended with Saucer Full of Secrets. That's one beer that had a fairly high percentage of Belgian candy sugar in it. So, whether it really has a pronounced effect on this blend or not, it certainly did on that beer itself. But in this case, I just think it has a nice little nuance that it adds to the finished product.
Now, I just took a sip of the 11, and I got a little bit of circus peanuts. Just a teeny tiny touch of the circus peanuts in there.
Well, that's certainly a beer flavor. I don't see it on the beer flavor wheel, but people certainly talk about it.
Huh. Well, it's good.
Yeah,
man.
This one doesn't have near the alcohol heat at the end. Much more drinkable. I would say Budweiser doesn't have anything on you guys. Drinkability.
Yeah, this is really dangerous.
I'll try to take that as a compliment.
Well,
Matt doesn't watch TV apparently.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't actually.
That's their big stick right now is that their beers has drinkability.
Yeah, they're all about.
I would
drinkability.
challenge that this has more.
As goofy as it sounds, though, that word is super important. When I went to Siebel, we talked, ad nauseum about drinkability, and it really is the major. It's too bad it's being used in mass marketing of light industrial lager, because it's a word that has everything to do with all beers and all styles, right? At the end of the day, they need to be drinkable. And it's a huge thrust of this program, too.
A lot of the times on big beers, sometimes it's kind of a burden to drink it. I mean, because it is such a big beer and there's so much alcohol that a lot of really good beers that are big are sippers. That's a sipper, because the flavors are so intense and it's just like smacking you in the face. Andy's right. This one is very drinkable. It's kind of, and again, it's kind of soft on the palate. And you could drink a lot of this in a hurry.
Yeah. I almost get like coconut kind of notes in there. I think it probably comes from the wood stuff too.
With a toasted coconut. Now, you could easily drink a pint of this. Mm-hmm. And it's not the 4-ounce sipping, by the fire on a cold night like tonight. Mm-hmm. You could definitely drink a bunch of this, and it's like I said, it's dangerous.
Well, it's so hard to get it.
Well, it's got the roofie in it, right, Matt?
The roofie beer.
You mentioned coconut, and I have to say that Todd Ashman, who's now at 50/50 Brewing, but was at Flossmoor Station back when he was doing a lot of his initial work with bourbon barrels, I think he's the one that I'd give credit to taking note of the fact that in the first 2 or 3 months that a beer sits in a barrel, you start to taste that bourbony kind of almost vanilla nuance that the oak can give. And it seems that after 6, maybe 9 months, you start getting this really nice coconut note from the bourbon barrels. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely a coveted flavor attribute that you can draw out of these barrels. What I haven't heard people talk about enough, I think, is what happens later. Do these things start, do they deteriorate? Do you start losing some of those nice flavors? And is there a peak point in time that you should be drawing these beers out of barrel? And I can't really speak to that yet. I think that's one of the fun things that this program is going to teach us, if we pay attention and take notes and don't get too sauced up on the beer as we're drinking it here anyway.
Now, do you judge homebrew competitions or competitions in the barrel categories or the aged wood age categories?
I definitely have, but not enough to really consider myself an expert in having tasted enough examples to really give you a ton of information about other people's beer or what else is going on out there. Unfortunately, at Great American Beer Festival, if you enter a category, you can't judge it. So I haven't had the opportunity to do the barrel-aged at JBF.
I'm just wondering if you've tasted some examples out there of wood-aged beers that haven't been done as well as they could be, and some hints of common mistakes that homebrewers might use if they get hold of a barrel, or if they play with say wood chips or something like that. What are some kind of common wood aging guidelines that you can give us?
Well, I think the thing that I noticed the most, and I'm actually probably oversensitive to it because we're working in a production brewery that's trying to produce just on time and making really fresh beer. The first thing that I notice in both homebrew and on the professional level is an overwhelming oxidized character. And I think if we're not careful when we transfer beer, be it from the carboy to the next carboy or from the carboy to the barrel or barrel to barrel, if we're not careful to purge out the vessel that we're moving finished fermented beer to, you really can do a lot of damage in a short amount of time. To a certain extent, that might seem counterintuitive because the barrel itself breathes, and winemakers talk all the time about microoxygenation and all these type of things. But there definitely is a distinctive difference between purging out that barrel really well before you transfer the beer to it or not, and the oxidation effects. I think that's the first thing that comes out. And it can be gross oxidation effects where you start getting green apple, which is, oxidized ethanol. It can go that far. But even just the papery or the overly dried fruit kind of characteristics that can come from aged beers. I mean, I get a little bit of that in these bottle-aged beers, but I think, if done correctly, that can enhance the experience. But if it's too aggressive up front, the beer just falls apart later on.
Yeah, I'm not getting any like sherry notes or cardboard notes or anything like that. So,
well, these beers in our program's a little different than most. We end ferment the beer. We bring the temperature down when the time is right to just do our cold stabilization or drop out what we need to, and then we rack to a purged barrel and we take it to the cooler, and we do our entire aging program at 45 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's going to slow down some of the, maybe some of the positive flavor uptake from the barrel, but it definitely also slows down oxidation. It can help keep microbiological issues at bay as well, and it's just part of our program.
Talk a little bit more in detail about that cold stabilization step. I mean, is that something that we could use?
Well, certainly. I mean, and you probably already do it. Basically, in our program, we consider the first 7 to 8 days of fermentation, even though all of the sugars are being consumed and ethanol has been produced in probably the first 3 or 4 days of our primary fermentation. The rest of that time is what we call warm side maturation, where yeast are reabsorbing diacetyl precursors. The rest of the flavor profile is starting to bloom. If we're doing dry hopping, we would typically do it in that window of time. Then the second maybe 7 to 10 days of our ale fermentation and maturation program is what we call cold stabilization. It's taking the beer down to, whatever set temperature. Most of our beers is taking it down below zero. All the protein and haze-forming compounds and polyphenol complexes that are going to come out of solution will come out of solution at that time. Hopefully most of them will sediment out of the beer. And at that point in time, you have a finished beer with all the flavors that you want. And with, the longer the cold time, probably the more the cold stabilization you're giving that beer. And then we would move it on in the process. That's what I'm talking about, basically. So
when you say below zero, is that Celsius or Fahrenheit?
Oh, Celsius, sorry. Yeah, I think in Celsius.
Okay.
I talk in Fahrenheit sometimes. So, maybe you take it down to 29 degrees on a beer that's 5% alcohol or more. The more alcohol, the lower the temperature you can bring it down to. The more further you can, what I would call naturally stabilize that beer, physically stabilize that beer, keep it from throwing a haze, in finished package later on, sediment out whatever it is that you don't want to have to try to either filter out or deal with downstream.
Yeah, we're beer geeks here, Matt. So don't be afraid to geek out on us here with the details.
We like that stuff. Now, Matt, the barrels that you're using to mature these different components of all these beers, are some of them bourbon barrels, some of them fresh American oak? I mean, can you kind of give us a cross section of the different barrels that you're using?
Yeah. There's a gentleman in the Midwest. He's actually an active home brewer back in the Madison area. His name is Tom Griffin. He's really been a godsend to at least our brewery, and I think many breweries around the country. He spends a lot of time talking with the distilleries. He goes down and kind of witnesses the dumps and collects the barrels, and he's largely responsible for getting us the barrels that we're using in this program, at least the spirits barrels. He's brought us barrels from the Old Fitzgerald Distillery, Heaven Hill Distillery, and he doesn't just bring bourbon barrels, but he'll bring wheat whiskey barrels, rye barrels, brandy barrels. The last time he came through, he brought some 20-plus-year-old Rip Van Winkle barrels. So he really has access to some fun stuff, and he pays attention. On top of that, we've brought in not so many wine barrels, but our own used Union oak barrels. And we've even played around with a few brand new, I guess what you would call distilled barrels or charred barrels that were, put together and charred for distilleries. But we got them before any distilled spirits got put into them. So, really, I guess the name of the game is we'll try just about anything. This particular program and this project, though, I mean, the general rules are, so far anyway, no fruit, no spice, and no critters. So we're not trying to make Belgian style or sour beers or, we're really trying to focus on the oak and the flavors that we can get from the barrels.
And you guys, these blends are really subtle. I mean, a lot of times when you drink a bourbon barrel beer, it's like smack, bourbon, and here's some oak with that too,
Yeah. 1-2 punch.
Yeah, but these are nice and balanced and interesting. And you say you're not making Belgians, but this third one, the 12, to me smells like a Belgian than the other two do.
Well, Sean Paxton, the homebrew chef, can take credit for that. He came in and we brewed his saucer full of secrets, and we used 9% in this blend. So the Belgian character comes from that beer, and I think we mentioned it earlier that we used quite a bit of Belgian dark candy sugar. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's basically a Belgian quad. I don't know how else to describe it. It's just a kind of over-the-top Belgian beer, and that beer, mind you, would never have been made here at this brewery if any of us brewers were involved in the formulation. That is definitely the case of a chef/home brewer somehow worming his way into a brewery and getting to brew his, probably what was supposed to be a 5-gallon batch recipe on a 50-barrel brew house. It's probably a home brewer's wet dream, I would think. I think I was overserved one night and drinking some beer with him and made a promise that he could brew the beer at the brewery, and then I woke up the next morning with him saying, "You promised?" No.
And Matt never paid for a beer again in his life.
But no, Sean's a really good friend of mine, and it was a lot of fun doing that project with him, and we brewed something we wouldn't have brewed otherwise, and I think it's a great example of what professional brewers can learn from home brewers. And I say that completely seriously. I think that so many of us in the quote unquote professional or production brewing world kind of gravitate away from being overly creative or trying adjuncts or other things outside of our comfort zone, because we really have to turn around and then figure out how to sell this stuff at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And it's another great thing that this barrel project has brought to us here is the ability to play around with styles that we would otherwise never have a market for, and somehow figure out how to fold them into this beer. So,
and
yeah,
I haven't tasted it yet, but it smells almost a little bit like an oaked, like a red wine to me, a little bit.
Well, remember,
12.
all of these
this
beers were blended by winemakers, so if they end up with wine-type flavors, you can thank them for that. We as brewers, or myself personally, I really try to stay out of the final phase, the blending, and I really try to stay true to what these winemakers come up with, because I just think it's such a unique process. And, brewers tend to gravitate to kind of exclamation points. They gravitate to really hoppy, aggressive flavors, roasty flavors, things like this. Winemakers go completely the other direction, and they really try to look for, not to use this word again, but drinkability and soft flavors and approachable flavors. Winemakers, in my experience, seem to have palates very similar to chefs. When we sit down and taste beers with chefs, they tend to gravitate away from the really bitter beers, and they gravitate towards not necessarily sweet, but malty and soft flavors. And I think that has its effect on this product.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because we're tasting all three in a row, but I tasted this, and the first thing that popped in my mind was a malted milkshake. Very chocolatey, very malty. But again, not as sticky as a milkshake.
No, I think. Go ahead, Matt.
Oh no, please.
Well, I think all three of these beers, the one thing that they have that's similar is the mouthfeel. I think they all have a pretty similar mouthfeel, but they're all very different. And even some of these beers have the same components. Do they not, Matt? I mean, do some of these have the same? I mean, not all the same components, but like, is there one beer that's consistent throughout all these?
There's definitely parabola. Well, wait a second. Yeah, no, we use parabola in all three beers. But in 12, basically in 10 and 11, it was the same original batch of parabola. And in 13, it was actually a new batch of parabola. So, Russian Imperial Stout plays a part in all of these. Although in 12, it ends up being the biggest piece of the puzzle at 44%. No, but I think it's really hard to get away from. Every brewery has house character. The yeast strains that we use are similar. Certainly the brewing process is similar, so that's going to shine through a little bit. I'm finding that more and more as the beer ages. They taste not necessarily more and more similar, but I get some of those basal kind of house characteristics out of the beer.
They're from the same family.
Yeah.
Now, when we talked about the 10, you talked about trying to blend kind of at first more equal parts of the beers and getting kind of a muddy characteristic. But then 10, what you wound up doing was having one beer as kind of the base beer that you added to and accented with other beers. Is that the theory that kind of carried with the 11 and 12 as well?
Yeah, so 10, I guess the base beer there was predominantly Abacus, which was our barley wine at the time. On the 11, Bravo kind of carried the major piece of the puzzle, and on our most recent blend, Parabola, the Russian Imperial Stout. So, if you're able to taste those beers independently, they taste very different, of course. Parabola being probably the most different. And it seems like each time we've sat down, the winemakers say you can go do two different directions here. If you want to stick with Parabola or the Russian Imperial Stout as your foundational piece, you're going to end up with, I guess, what would be the equivalent to them, I guess, Super Tuscan or Cabernet, or you're going that direction. If you want to stick with some of these lighter bodied and lighter styled beers, you're going to end up with something maybe a little more elegant. This last blend, we ended up, going a little bit on the aggressive side, with Parabola being the major player.
Yeah, we don't have a reference with glasses all beside each other, but it seems to me like 12 is it darker than the other two?
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
Matt, There's a lot of talk, and I think in a lot of the homebrew clubs around the country, one of the things that's fun to do is, brew a big beer and throw it in a barrel, whether it's a whiskey barrel, a new American oak barrel. What, if any, suggestions do you have for the home brewer to go and do that? From racking to aging to bottling, all the way through the process. What suggestions do you have that could help us out?
Well, I think I mentioned it before about purging the barrel before you rack to it. I really think that you want to try to eliminate as much of that kind of gross oxygen in the barrel before you rack the beer to it. Winemakers will tell you not to let the beer or the wine, or in their case wine, but in our case let's just call it product, sit on top of yeast for too long. And the way we kind of get around that is we try to make sure that in that cold stabilization step that we've really sedimented out the majority of the yeast. I think it's okay to transfer a little bit of yeast over to the barrel. That'll help protect it. But if you're taking over a lot of yeast, especially in a big beer, it's going to die. You're going to get yeast autolysis. You're going to start getting some of those brothy characteristics that aren't so appealing. And I think it's okay to go in and taste that beer on a fairly regular schedule, but overhandling of beer inevitably ends up wrecking things. So not every time your buddies come over from across the street should you crack open that bung and thieve out something. And I think let it rest, let it do its thing. If you're going to take samples out of the barrel, you should be very cautious. When we pull the bung out of the barrel, we actually purge out the headspace with CO2 and make sure that we kind of leave that barrel in, again, a very low oxygen state. But again, it's really the new frontier in many ways. There's a lot of experimentation going on, so I'm all for trying new things and new twists to it all. And at the end of the day, your taste buds will tell you. You can tell if a beer's going the wrong direction, and so proof is in the pudding.
Absolutely. Well, this pudding's really good.
Yeah, no kidding.
Plenty of proof here.
Yeah. It's a 24 proof, I guess.
24.
Well, this has been wonderful, and this is one of the. This is why I do this, is for the experiences like this that very few other people get to do, and I appreciate everybody involved here in sharing this experience. Are there any parting words that you guys can give to our homebrewers out there?
Well, I think when you're drinking these beers, it's nice to have a Pilsner beer or something light to wash this flavor off of your tongue as you move before a palate cleanser.
Something with real drinkability, is that what you're saying?
I have no deep words of wisdom, but just have fun and may your next brew be your very best.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Matt.
Absolutely.
Oh, thanks for having us. This is awesome.
Absolutely.
Thanks again to Matt and Jamie at Firestone Walker, and a very special thanks to Mark Smith for the beers, and to Andy Sparks of thehomebrewery.com for joining us again, and many happy wishes to Mark and Kat for the years to come. Remember, we've got Brewers Logbooks and our new Basic Winemaking Introduction to Wine Kits DVD out there on our online store. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to James at basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from. You can check out our low-tech lagering and decoction mashing DVD on basicbrewingshop.com. There are also our original DVDs, Basic Brewing Introduction to Extract Home Brewing and Stepping into All Grain. And we've got combo deals out there on our shop, and you can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order it online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Remember, we've also got shirts, and we want to thank everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Sunshade for Toyota Prius and The Power of Your Subconscious Mind Thanks again, everybody. And remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We appreciate your support. We also have a link for Audible.com out there and a link to the Apple Store. That's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson down in Austin. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.